Hello and welcome to another season of Irish Premiership predictions from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm Daniel Cody and with me is the returning Charlie Betts for the new season. Couldn't bear to miss an Irish Premiership episode. We're going to do the same as we did last year for anyone that wasn't here. We're going to go through each of the clubs in alphabetical order, talk a little bit about our thoughts for them ahead of the upcoming season, and then we'll predict what position we think they're going to finish. And that's where things normally start to go wrong. So, Charlie, let's start with the club probably you know best at the start of the alphabet, which is Ballymena United. A very interesting season last year. Just ran out of steam as injuries hit towards the end of the season. What do you think or make of their summer so far? Because it hasn't looked particularly good on the pitch in terms of players. And what do you think for them this season?
Do you know, obviously, the obvious thing is Shane McCartan going. That's the big headline. And with that, a large part of Ballymena's goals. I think the biggest problem they had last year was the squad was too thin. And once the injuries hit, I mean, obviously there was issues with the goalkeeper and injuries to goalkeeper, which is just unfortunate. I mean, to lose two of your goalkeepers and then to put a 16-year-old is bad luck. But across the pitch, there was key areas that were sort of short of players. So I think what they've done is essentially sold McCartan, which a large part of their goal, but they brought in 6 or 7 middle-of-the-road average squad players. Do I think they're going to finish anywhere higher than, in the top half of the table? No, because I think it's just a year of probably consolidating maybe that money that essentially me and you spoke off camera that Shane McCartan money is the European money that they missed out on by not getting 7th really, last year. I don't see much more than other than a repeat of last year really. So I've gone for 8th. They've lost Kofi Barmer as well at the back. I mean, we'll go on to maybe why that benefits Larne a bit, but he's probably one of the hotter prospects of the league last year. And I just think it's a year of just not surviving because they're never going to get relegated, but maybe put a lot into the cups and just consolidate a bit of league position.
Yeah, I'm largely in agreement with you, actually. I think the one thing that I'll put as a slight caveat on it is I can already see based on the last couple of days, I think David Jeffrey is going to be probably the most active manager in the last week and a half of the window. And that's given me a little bit of doubt. The only signing I want to mention is Parkhouse, the centre forward. He came through, has played at a lot of English clubs on loan, and he's a good target man. I think he'll suit the way David Jeffrey plays. Obviously, there was the big saga about Dougie Wilson signing his pre-contract agreement last year, but they've lost so much experience. You mentioned Balmer and McCartan, which are the 2 superstars on paper, but even the likes of, I know you weren't the biggest fan, but Tony Kane, then you've got Jim Irvin, Knowles Glendinning, the goalkeeper. There's a lot of experience going out of the squad. I think it's a rebuilding season as well. The only potential saving grace is they are being quite heavily linked with Joe Gormley at the minute, and that could just fire them, give them that little bit of firepower back up front. But I've gone one lower than you because of a surprise further down. So I'll put Ballymena in 9th. I think it's a rebuilding year. Let's move on to Carrick Rangers, who had a pretty dismal year last year, but it's very hard to judge the teams at the bottom, isn't it? Because of the lack of threat of relegation last year.
The year before, though, they were surprised everyone. I think they were 8th or 9th the previous year. And we mentioned, I think, in the last year's predictions about maybe they'd gone for some younger players. Normally, Carrick would be, I don't want to say a retirement team, but where players tend to go when they get to the end of their career. Last year, they went for the youth. Didn't quite work out. So I think they've gone back to what they know. And they've signed Jim Irvin, Cushley from Crusaders, who probably has got one of the strongest left foots in the league. Lacks a bit of fitness, to put it politely. But a real good signing, I think, actually, who's maybe a bit younger and has got a bit of experience, is Ben Tilney, who probably didn't get much of a shout at Larne, had a bit of a loan at Portadown, hasn't quite worked out, but he's got so much potential. And you think if he can unlock that with a bit of experience around him, that we just mentioned some of those names, I think they'll be all right. I don't think they're going to be as low as they were last year. I've got them down as 9th because I just think that experience coupled with the youth that they had last year, I think it's a bit of a cycle with Carrick. I think you'll have a year where they do really well, where that experience pays off. Then they get too old and then they have to go for the youth and that. But do you know what I mean? I think it's just going to be that perpetual cycle. But I think they're in a year where maybe that combination of Irvin and some of those younger lads from last year might just push them up a little bit more. They've got some great experience and quality in their signings. So for me, I've gone for 9th.
Yeah, I'm not too far off you again here. I think probably the thing to highlight is they've had, in terms of the squad, the biggest overhaul of the summer of any club in the league. A massive, I mean, half the squad's gone essentially. But you mentioned the crucial top-tier experience they've added. And even in Tilney, he might only be 24, but he's got top-tier experience that a lot of the players in the squad haven't got. The problem to address is they let in 92 goals last season. It was a terrible effort in 38 games. It's very hard to assess it because of that threat of relegation. Like you mentioned, they threw in a few more younger ones than they would normally. I think they'll be better defensively, but I still think they'll struggle for goals a bit. So I've got them just to survive in 10th, but it was close between them and the team I've put below them. Let's move on to Cliftonville. Now, obviously, rumours circulating with Joe Gormley at the moment, but what do you make of them? Because they've been sort of a bottom of the top half for a few years now.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, Dan, I think we could probably copy and paste what we said last year about them. They've not really added much else. They've got a good defensive record. They've added Johnny Addis from Ballymena, good solid centre half. Probably going to be a bit more of a rotation, sort of squad rotation in terms of him. I don't see him necessarily starting there. But they've had a good defensive record. They lost Conor McMenamin into Glentoran, but they did then get Paul O'Neill, who is probably a little bit more clinical than McMenamin, but you do lose a bit of that trickery. So I don't know. I mean, I'd love to know, even if people in the comments down below could tell me what's actually happened with Joe Gormley. Because, obviously there must be a fallout or something like that, because he's not past his peak, I don't think. He's a very good, well-known striker. But he just could not get a look in last year. He was getting 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. And I thought Cliftonville probably lacked a bit of firepower. They did lack a bit of goals, really. As we said, we've got that good defensive foundation. So I don't know what's going on. He probably needs to get out. But will they replace him? The window suggests otherwise. So for me, I think another year of consolidation. I think I've got them down almost identical to last year. And I think I've got them in 5th.
I'm really interested to know, actually, because my top 5 wrote itself. So I'm interested to see who you've got them above. But we'll get to that in a bit later on. I'm really surprised by their window, actually. Just a simple straight swap on the right with McDonough coming in. Good replacement for O'Connor. Like you mentioned, Johnny Addis and also Chris Gallagher from Glentoran. Good squad additions in positions they needed support. But the big worry for me is actually between the sticks. Aaron McCary off to Glentoran. We'll talk about him in a bit, I'm sure. That leaves young Declan Dunn and then a new signing, McNicholas, who's only 21 as well, between the sticks. There's not a lot of experience. And for a side that were potentially knocking on the door of falling into the bottom half, if they lose that and then lose the goals up front, I'm not sure that they can sneak 6th. So I've put them there just because of the lack of consistency for the couple of sides below them. But I wouldn't be shocked if Cliftonville this year or next drop out the top 6 with their current policy. On to the next of the C's, which is Coleraine. Always in the mix under Oren Kearney, always seem to overachieve. But what have you gone for this year?
Yeah, so they had a cracking year last year. I've gone for 4th, and it all hinges on basically the sale of one man, which is Ben Doherty. For me, out of all the transfers that we're probably going to talk about and have talked about, probably the most underrated transfer that's gone through. He is such an integral part of their attack. He plays beautifully off of that second ball, which I always go on about. I know Coleraine are masters at that. They have a game plan. They're really effective at it. And Ben Doherty was such an important part of that, and they got so many goals from that. Also, you look at Owen Bradley, who, again, a central figurehead of that. He's definitely been coming off the bench this year. He's 37. He's not going to have the legs that he's had before. Cute centre forward, winning free kicks and stuff. But I just think they haven't really replaced him. I'm starting to see maybe that gap slowly starting to appear between the full-time teams and then Coleraine, who are probably the best of the sort of semi-pro teams, if I'm being brutally honest, at the moment. I got Catherine in, and as great as he is, and I've watched him quite a lot of Ballymena, incredibly inconsistent. That's one thing you've got with Ben Doherty. He was consistent 7, 8 out of 10 every single week. You're not going to get that with Catherine. He'll have a 10 out of 10, and he might score a hat-trick, and then you'll go missing for 2 games. And I just think that doesn't quite suit Colerane's game plan and disciplined approach to a game. However, I will caveat that maybe Oren Kearney's the man to turn that around in Catherine. So for me, it's sort of a decent window, but I just think they might drop down to 4th.
Yeah, I thought really hard about putting them higher, but I have in the end got our first agreement in position. I've gone for 4th as well. They've got one of the most settled squads. So I think one of the things we could say is where some of the others, you saw Glentoran last year started really slowly. Coleraine aren't at risk of that, in my opinion. So I think they'll be okay on that front. Not had as long a European run as they did last season. It should be a strong start. I know they've lost Ben Doherty, but Conor McKendry's a pretty able replacement in the wide area in midfield. I mentioned the same thing on Friel, really, which if he finds his best form, he could be one of the most inspired additions of the window, but you can't bank on it. It's exactly as you've said. The consistency is the bit that's missing. So I don't know what to expect from him. Rodney Brown, a little bit of experience. I guess the thing we say with Coleraine is just every year they seem to make a very gradual improvement to the squad, and that's the best you can say for Oren Kearney. So I think they'll be up there again. I think the top 4 or 5 is going to be so tight this year, but I've put Coleraine in 4th place. Up next, the final one of the season in the league is Crusaders. I think it would be fair to say a very disappointing year last year, but what do you make of the window this summer?
We had them down really high last year. I think you might have even had them 2nd or 3rd, respectively, and they scraped 6th, really. I mean, after the split, they had less points than, I think, 2 teams below them. I know it's obviously different, but Do you know what it is for me? They brought in Johnny McMurray, and they seem to be buying over the last couple of years a lot of centre forwards, and I don't think that's the issue. If I'm honest, I don't think the lack of goals that they're getting isn't because they haven't got good centre forwards. They've got, for example, they brought in Johnny Fraser as well. They've got Johnny Owens up front as well, Adam Leckie, all capable strikers, and then they bring in more. I just think, for me, anytime I've watched them, there's been such a disjointed setup between the midfield and defence and the forward. The centre forwards are always hung out to dry, in my opinion. There's such a big gap between the two lines, and they haven't really addressed that. However, it's a fairly easy tactical change to make. Bringing in another big centre forward, Johnny McMurray is not great industry. He's great at holding the ball up, but he's not going to run channels. He's not going to skip past 4 or 5 players. Anything in the box, he'll dispatch. They've already got 2 or 3 like him already, so I don't really understand that move, in my opinion. Johnny Fraser might give a little bit more creativity. I mean, even like Ben Kennedy, to be honest, Dan, I was so disappointed with him last year. We talked about massively beforehand. And he, a few decent set pieces, a few decent performances here and there. But given his experience, I was disappointed. And I'm just predicting another year of that. I don't think all the time that they've got the setup that they have and they maybe got the model that they've got, I just don't see it changing. So I've gone for 6th.
I've actually gone one higher. So I've gone for 5th place just because of Cliftonville losing McCary in goal. I think the best signing of the summer for them, I know you've mentioned the attacking players, is probably Josh Robinson coming back at centre-half, because for all of their problems in odd games scoring goals, their problem last season mainly was their defensive record. I think that addresses a part of a problem there. They've also got Lewis Patterson back from Fleetwood. He went over the water at 16. He's come back. Still a young player, but could potentially improve the defence later down the line. The biggest thing for me was some of the nonsense going on off the pitch. The weird transfer contract saga with Jordan Forsyth, transfer requests, then signing a new deal 3 weeks later on improved terms. I'm a little worried about it. They have improved their squad a little. They've lost a few older heads, but I think they'll get 5th place. I think we're probably going to be in agreement with the next team, which is Dungannon Swifts. A terrible year last year. Not a huge amount done in the summer. Anything other than 12th?
No, I've gone down as 12th. I mean, the goalkeeper's a massive worry. Roy Carroll, a great advert for the game and all of that, but you're in a pretty dodgy position if you're having to bring him back at, 41, 42? And they still really haven't addressed that goalkeeper situation. They've got another young lad in. I just don't see it. They have improved a little bit. They've got a couple of lads from Ballymena and Knowles and McCready, 28, 31 years old. So you could argue they've invested a little bit more. Previously, some of the lads they brought in have been in their mid-30s. So you get a year out of them tops. I just don't see anything. I mean, defensively, they were appalling last year. Didn't really have any firepower. I think they'll be closer. They were miles off bottom last year. I still think they'll be bottom, but I think it'll be a little bit closer this year.
Yeah, complete agreement. They have added experience. I think Joe McCready's possibly the only man who can save them from bottom place, because they were so woeful in front of goal last year. You've got the same problem at the other end, though, which is with Roy Carroll going replaced, they're putting their hopes on a young keeper on loan from Linfield, which is a massive ask. So they've taken a punt on a few others from the lower leagues, particularly in the forward positions. But I think it's going to be a really tough year for them. Like you say, I think they'll probably get past the sort of 20-point mark, but I actually think they'll be a little better going forward and probably worse defensively. Dungannon Swifts 12 for me. Let's move on to Glenavon. An interesting triple signing from Linfield this summer. And of course, they've brought in an Irish Premiership legend as well.
The biggest thing for me is I think it's an age issue. I generally had them to I was in such a quandary whether I thought they could have sneaked 6th. But I just think when the games come thick and fast, Andy Waterworth, great servant of the game and has been, was a bit part player for Linfield for obvious reasons. You get into that sort of stage. Is he going to be able to do 3 times a week, 90 minutes? Probably not. They have offloaded tons of players. Maybe some of it Deadwood, but their squad is definitely smaller than it was last year. I think they've got the oldest average age of the whole division at 28 and a half, I think. So I think they'll start well. I think they'll finish well. I think the middle period, November to February, March time, is going to be where their undoing is. So I've got them down as 7th.
Yeah, I'm not far off agreeing with you again. It was a very good experience triple signing from Linfield. And they also added Snoddy permanently after the loan last year. But you can only really see much of the same because, like you say, they haven't got a big enough squad to really push on and push for the top 6. I actually think they've got more chance of being overtaken this year by a couple of others. So I'm going to put Glenavon in 8th because I've got a wild card in for 7th place.
Wow.
Now we get to what's probably going to be the sticking point of this, because we've got what are the big 3 on paper in terms of finances and squad this year. Now, last year, you were very ballsy with Glentoran, and I feel you may have gone a year too soon with it, as I hinted in the episode. What have you done this year and why?
There's one key part that's holding Glentoran back, and I don't like doing this. I don't really like bashing people or anything like that, but it's the manager. I just think, for whatever he's done in the game, he's been brilliant as a coach and stuff like that. But the constant rotation of the squad, I mean, there'll be a stat man somewhere who can tell me exactly, but I'm sure I read somewhere that I don't think he put the same team out twice in a row until like March time. That's ridiculous, really, when you consider. And that's my biggest problem is they've got a huge squad of a massive talent. And that's great, but how are you going to keep them all happy? How are you going to get that cohesion? How are you going to gel them together, particularly that front line? They've made some fantastic signs. Shane McCartan's going to bring goals. You know he is. You know, we've already spoke about Gail Bigger-Romana, people like that. I like Shannon Klukas as an example, someone we've interviewed. Does he really need to be there? They've got players in front of him. Do you know what I mean? It's just that sort of thing that I feel like there's too many big names, too many good players, and he's not the man to manage them. And because of that, he'll be the tinker man. And it's again controversial the opposite way this time. I've actually got him down as third.
One thing I didn't expect at the start of this episode was to have placed Glentoran above you. I have put Glentoran in second place. Now, like you, I'd argue on paper they've got not just, but by far the strongest squad in the league. They have added fantastic depth. They were the best defence in the league last season, despite probably the Dale Colin transfer and goal not working out to the extent they wanted to. He's gone now, and McCary and Glendinning, probably two of the best 5 keepers in the league, in my opinion, I'd say. So how he's going to keep them both happy, I'm not sure, but I'd imagine McCary would have to be number one. Yeah. Shane McCartan, talk of the summer. I think they've said it's an Irish League transfer record for that deal. And once he got going in the second half of the season with Ballymena, I mean, he single-handedly carried an injury-hit side to a very comfortable position. If they play to his strengths, which I'm not sure they will, he will be fantastic for them. They can't afford another slow start. They started the season so poorly last year. But then they were really poor in Europe against TNS in the first qualifying round this season. They should have got through that tight. And you saw how far TNS went afterwards. I think they'll miss out just because of the manager again, like you say. Only just, but I think I'm going to go for second place. On to the often talked about big money spenders in Larne. Had a fantastic run in Europe in pre-season and did really well to get through a couple of rounds there. Continue to do very good business. Where have you put them? Because this one and the next one are probably your big two.
I think this is the year it comes together. And I'll tell you why, because when we did our Irish Cup final prediction, there was 3 sort of key areas that me and you spoke about. And what I think has been brilliant, and it's great to see from a club, is I feel like they've addressed those or tried to address those 3 areas. So they brought in Kofi Barmer. We spoke for weeks and weeks and weeks prior to that cup final about the lack of pace at the back. Anything in front of, say, Albert Watson, anything like that, you know, he can deal with. The ball in behind, in their formation, it just kills them. They like to play a high-pressing game with centre-halves who aren't quite capable of dealing with that. With Kofi Barmer, though, probably the biggest prospect of any defender in the league at the minute. And I mentioned it earlier, Ben Doherty, with him and Navid Nasseri now, I know they've lost Martin Donnelly, but they've brought in a bit of creativity. And that was the one thing that we highlighted, was that if you shut out Fuad Souli in the middle, Larne didn't really have anywhere else to go. The ball from back to front didn't work from them. So they had to go through the middle. But if you stopped Souli playing, you sort of stopped Larne a little bit. Now, though, you could argue with Ben Doherty, you've got that option. If you do need to go longer, you've got someone who can maybe play off of that second ball, off of the front man. But you've also got that trickery and that creativity and that guile in Nasseri. For whatever reason, it didn't work out at Linfield. The year before, he was unplayable. He was unplayable for Glentoran. If Larne can get that Nasseri, I think they're the missing pieces of the jigsaw. It gives them an extra string to their bow. It gives them another dynamic. So for me, I think they're going to have to... I've got them down to win the league. I think they're the league winners personally.
Well, this is a dilemma because I was so sure you weren't going to go for it that I went for Larne to win the league as well. I put the same thing as you. We talked so much last season about defensive frailties. They had the weakest record of the top 4, and ultimately that's what cost them. Balmer is a brilliant addition. We know, and to get him on a free as well means that they're starting to think on the business front. They've been talked about for the investment. They're probably going to make profits on people like him now. And the other one that went under the radar at the back was Kieran Bolger from Northampton, an Irish lad coming back to the Northern Irish Prem. He's a little bit quicker, but he's a little bit more comfortable on the ball again. And I just think whether they want to play a back 2 or a 3 now, they can protect Albert Watson or even afford to leave him out for some games. So I think he's probably gone under the radar a little bit. I agree with you. I think Nasseri is going to suit Larne down to the ground and will actually become probably one of the signings of the summer in the league. And they have been rumoured with Joe Gormley, although the owners come out and said they're done for the summer, which does leave me with a very slight worry for depth up front. Given the fact that I think Linfield have got significantly weaker for obvious reasons we'll talk about in a moment, I think Larne will pick them, but I'd be surprised with the top 3 if there's any more than 5 or 6 points between them come the end of the season. We both agree that Larne are going to win the league, which means we both think Linfield aren't. Why not, Charlie?
Well, I've got them down in second on the basis of what I said earlier, of the Glentoran implosion. If Glentoran get it right, like you said, I think, well, I know we sort of joke about it a little bit, but I think you could be bang on with the top three in your order. On Linfield's front, you can talk about Watworth and the other ones who've gone to Glenavon, but obviously the biggest one is Shane Lavery. And you were never going to replace him because, you know, in the Irish League, there's not going to be a like-for-like replacement in the Irish League. That's a given, you know. You could then argue, should you then go over to Scotland and England? But then are you sort of making a bit of, you know, the money they got for Lavery, they're probably going to have to spend to get a replacement for him. So do you know what I mean? You go to Scotland and England, you're going to pay a premium. So I think because of that, they were always going to be on a bit of a loss. Marty Donnelly, he's going to add a little bit. He's not going to be in the same bracket as Lavery. And by that, they've just lost a ton of goals. We mentioned it earlier, Watworth coming off the bench. There's still some good quality there. I don't want to write them off. You still got people like lads like Joel Cooper. You know, we spoke about maybe Mickey Newbury, who we've interviewed, and Tra Hume, who was at Ballymena last year on loan, almost being like new signings because they didn't really feature last year because they had likes of Gallagher who was still there, who were on the view of going. So you could argue they're maybe slightly younger, newer signings, but I just think that lack of experience might cost them a bit. So lack of experience, lack of goals is not going to win them the league. However, I'm banking on a Glentoran implosion. So I'm going to go, they'll stumble their way to second.
Yeah, I've gone lower, as you know, with Glentoran in second. So I've got them Linfield in third. I've basically gone on paper. They haven't got one of the best two squads in the league. And if David Healy can win this league this season, it will be his greatest achievement so far, in my opinion. They were a little bit disappointed in Europe at the start of the year and ironically didn't take chances, really struggled for goals. And as you mentioned, Lavery's irreplaceable at that level. And you go back the last 5 years or so, I think of particularly when Gavin White left Crusaders, the next couple of years, it was so telling on the pitch. And I think the same's going to happen with Linfield. The fact that Waterworth's got to that age where he's had to move on as well has probably just been a double hammer blow. The only hope they've got up there is Christy Manzinga's looked a little bit better in pre-season and he has got the potential to be fantastic. So I just hope that he can find top form because that gives them a title chance. But at the moment, they're so reliant on like young Billy Chadwick they've got on loan from Hull. They have improved defensively, in my opinion. Ross going from Ayr United, I saw quite a bit of the Scottish Championship last season. I think he's going to be a good signing at the back. And although the Nasseri-Donnelly swap deal is a disadvantage on paper, I actually think it suits what Linfield need at the moment a bit better. So I think they'll be all right for that this season. But on paper, I can't see them finishing above third. And if David Healy does achieve more, it's a great achievement for me. Let's move on to the final two. So I'm trying to remember what two positions you've got left now with this one coming up. Because Portadown were your surprise last season. And you've interviewed the manager. He's a manager that you hold in high regard. But which one of the two have you put them in? I'd be surprised if it's not 10th.
Well, you'll be surprised then. I think I've gone for 11th. I love Matthew Tipton. I think what he's doing there is a great project. I think what he's doing there is, you know, and I spoke to him personally about the whole thing about youth, and he doesn't use that as an excuse. But you made an excellent point last year, which retrospectively I encountered, was about they play lovely football, but you can't do that in November to February, particularly in Northern Ireland. It seems to constantly rain throughout the whole year over there. Do you know what I mean? So they've obviously got a model of youth players. You know, their average age of squad is 23, youngest in the league by a long way. I just don't think that's going to be enough this year. I think other teams around them, we mentioned about Dungannon strengthening a little bit, not going to be enough to overtake them, but just going to close that gap. That then puts a bit of pressure on them. And I just think that people like even Warrenpoint, we'll talk about in a minute, have maybe strengthened a little bit. Everyone around them seems to have up-leveled a bit, whereas I think Portadown have just added to what they've already got. And so on that basis, they've got them to drop a little bit. So for me, 11th place.
Well, this is very interesting because I have actually done what you did last year. So I was and ahhing between Cliftonville, Glenavon, and my wild card, which is Portadown, between 6th and 8th. And I've chucked them in 7th place. I think it'll be close with Glenavon, but the young squad's a year later in its development. And actually, for all they started the season poorly last year, when the games came thick and fast, and they were even more so for Portadown because their pitch is essentially unplayable for 4 months of the year, which may mean they don't play as much in the winter period. They might be weaker. I actually thought they did really well the second half of the year, and they looked a much better side. Now, as you say, there is that possibility that with the threat of relegation and pressure on a young team, they might go backwards. But they conceded a lot of sloppy goals last year. They brought in an excellent keeper, which is one of the few bits of business they did, which is a former South African youth international in Jeffrey Barr. I think he's going to be a really good addition. And Oren Jackson, he's not very well known as a young defender. He came through in the lower leagues of England and worked his way down to St Ives Town, but I actually think he'll be a good player too. And in Michael Ruddy, they've added a little bit of experience in the defence. So although they haven't done a huge amount, they focused on the defensive area when they were weakest. The only thing I'm going to say before making myself look an idiot by putting them in 7th place is if, as rumoured, Lee Bonnis does then leave the club before the end of the window and go to the EFL or the Premier League, wherever it ends up being, they will be nowhere near 7th place, and you can put them back in the 10th, 11th, 12th bracket again. Because going forward, he is potentially the next Shane Lavery, potentially the next player of that ilk at the top end of Northern Irish football. So on that basis, I've got them flying up, competing for 6th and in 7th place. But if Lee Bonnis goes, it's a different story for me. Which means we've then disagreed on the final club as well in Warrenpoint. Because you've got 10th place remaining, I've got 11th place remaining. Why have you got them to be away from trouble?
I think last year you had Friar McCaffrey, who maybe being a bigger fish in a smaller pond, for want of a better phrase, suited him. They've got Connor Mitchell, who's obviously coming from Larne. I think that was an area, they did let in a lot of goals. They've got a bit between their teeth. I think the manager seems to have installed a siege mentality. They turned over big teams like Linfield at one point last year as well. I haven't really got much in the way of stats or anything like that, but I just think that they've not really done a lot of business, which suits them. Brought in a couple of areas that they wanted to sort out, not really got rid of a lot, not really, changed a lot. And they were consistent last year. And I think actually, given what we've spoken about the other teams, that consistency might just be enough to keep them safe of relegation. So that's why I've gone for 10th. You, on the other hand, obviously think that might not be enough.
I've sort of taken the step of presuming last season without the pressure, probably more in line with what happened to Carrick a couple of years ago. And I think they'll fall backwards again this year. I do think Connor Mitchell's a good addition in goal. I'm actually surprised he wasn't able to ever displace Connor Devlin at Larne. I think he's a really good goalkeeper in the league. The back four is a huge concern for me. Back four, back five, whatever it wants to be. They are, I just feel, probably one of the weakest two teams defensively in the league. And given the fact that I think Carrick are going to improve at the back, I obviously have to then put Warrenpoint behind them. But it will be incredibly close between those two, in my opinion. They have improved going forward. Wade Slater's got plenty of pace and he's very direct, which is something that they haven't always had, Warrenpoint. And Morehouse, a good addition going forward as well. But the defensive worries too much for me. I think Carrick will edge them out because they've added a bit more. And I don't think Portadown are going to be anywhere near it. So based on that, I have to put them down in 11th place. And those are our Irish Premiership predictions for the 2021-22 season. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to get to see quite as much of it this year because BBC Northern Ireland were live streaming games galore last year, which suited us down to the ground here. But let us know what you think in the comments of our predictions, where you think your side's going to finish this year, and who's going to have a late flurry of action in the transfer window come the end of August. If you did enjoy the episode, please do chuck a thumbs up on it. Subscribe down below for regular content from the Honest Football Podcast. Thank you to Charlie for joining me as always. And hopefully, we'll see you next time.